Hello everyone. I've decided to do occasional in-depth reviews of albums I have in my music collection, and with November upon us, I've decided to start with an album that's celebrating its 50th anniversary this month. All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. By 1970, George Harrison had accumulated quite a backlog of songs that had been offered to the Beatles to record and release, only for the songs to be rejected, largely due to unwillingness to give George more than an average of 2 songs worth of space per album. The quality of his songwriting had improved greatly over those years. In addition, George had taken up several other opportunities to demonstrate his abilities as a songwriter and musician, and was the first Beatle to release solo records. First with the Wonderwall music soundtrack in 1968, and again with the experimental electronic sound in 1969. With the inclusion of Something and Here Comes the Sun on the Beatles' Abbey Road, it became apparent that George's songwriting abilities had grown to a point that he could rival his bandmates John Lennon and Paul McCartney. In addition, Harrison had been given a fresh perspective on performing music, thanks to opportunities he had taken to act as a guest musician with other musical acts, such as Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, as well as his then uncredited guest appearance on the Cream song Badge. Despite having already recorded and released 2 solo albums already, George's attitude towards what would become the All Things Must Pass album was that, in his opinion, it would be his first true solo album. Having introduced producer Phil Spector to the group, first via inviting him to participate in the recording of the Plastic Ono Band's Instant Karma, and later enlisting his aid in salvaging the Let It Be tapes for commercial release, George had later demoed a massive backlog of songs to Spector at his home in Friar Park in early 1970. Some of the album tracks were clearly influenced by Bob Dylan and the band, while others revolved around Harrison's working relationship with the Beatles as they began to drift apart. Starting with an outtake from the album that is now available on most CD prints as a bonus track, I Live For You has a strong folk country feel to it, and is generally seen as both a love song and a devotional piece. The majority of the release track was actually recorded in 2000 with both George and his son Donnie on guitars and other instruments, only salvaging George's lead vocal and Pete Drake's pedal steel guitar from the original 1970 backing track. George often spoke fondly of Drake's work on the album, calling the pedal steel guitar, quote, the bagpipes of country and western music. Most reviews of the song have been very positive. Now onto the album proper. Considered an expression of friendship between Harrison and co-songwriter Bob Dylan, I'd Have You Any Time's lyrical structure consists of Harrison-penned verses in a gentle tone, asking that Dylan let down his guard, with the Dylan-written refrain responding positively toward these overtures. When recording the song, George played the acoustic guitar part, while guest musician Eric Clapton performed the lead guitar. Klaus Voormann filled in on bass, and future Yes drummer Alan White handled the kit. Personally, I'd have to say I like the relaxed feel of this song a lot. Harrison's verse lyrics are a gentle reassurance rather than a loud plea for openness, and set a calm opening mood for the album. A foray into country music, Behind That Locked Door was written as a request to Bob Dylan to overcome his anxiety prior to a performance at the Isle of Wight festival. It also acknowledges Dylan's strong influence on Harrison as a musician and songwriter. While the Isle of Wight performance and its aftermath would further feed Dylan's unease about performing music, efforts by Harrison to provide comfort, such as this piece of music, would convince him to return, as evidenced by his last-minute appearance at the concert for Bangladesh the following year. More melodic and less spontaneous than Bob Dylan's original, Harrison's cover of If Not For You was well received by the music press at the time. Among the personnel for the studio recording were Gary Wright, Ringo Starr, and Billy Preston. Dylan himself would perform the song at the concert for Bangladesh, and Harrison revisited the song in a 1992 set at Madison Square Garden. Carrying a strong Dylan influence, Apple Scruffs was a wholehearted salute to all the various people who would hang around outside frequent Beatle gathering spots, such as recording studios, for a chance to meet and chat with members of the Fab Four. Despite his aversion to fan worship, George had developed good friendships with a number of the Scruffs. The song was a late addition to the album and was recorded almost entirely solo, save for a few percussive taps by longtime Beatles associate Mal Evans. Harrison jokingly credited his own backing vocals to the George O'Hara Smith Singers, and had to coach himself on the harmonica part due to having difficulty playing the part while sporting a thick beard. Upon completion of the track, he invited the present Scruffs outside Abbey Road Studios to come in and listen to it. Apple Scruffs is one of my favorite songs off the album, partly due to how much it stands out. Born out of Harrison's early experimentation with open E-tuned slide guitar, I Dig Love is widely believed to have also grown, lyrically, from George's time touring with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, at which time several witnesses are said to have seen him, quote, letting his hair down on tour, despite the pro-abstinent stance of the Hare Krishna movement he was strongly associated with. His growing interest in the slide guitar also took form at the same time, as he was asked to cover the slide guitar parts Dave Mason had played prior to quitting the tour. While it's unknown which other musicians played on the song, there are conflicting stories regarding this with several songs on the album. It's widely accepted that among the possible musicians were Ringo Starr, Dave Mason, Klaus Voormann, Billy Preston, Gary Wright, and future Derek and the Dominoes members Eric Clapton, Bobby Whitlock, and Jim Gordon. While I wouldn't go so far as to call it a favorite off the album, I do enjoy the free-form feel of the song. Largely inspired by the band's music from Big Pink, which Harrison credited with renewing his interest in the guitar after a couple years of wanting to focus more on the Indian sitar, the album's title track was written initially with having band drummer Levon Helm as its singer. The song was written in late 1968 during Harrison's stay in upstate New York, rekindling his friendship with Bob Dylan, which also yielded the song I'd Have You Anytime. Harrison offered the song to the Beatles during the Get Back sessions in early 1969, and the song was worked on during the first 4 days of their stay at Twickenham Studios. The song was rehearsed some more after his brief departure from the Beatles and return, but like many of the songs he offered at this point, it was passed over. With encouragement from John Lennon and Yoko Ono on the possibility of recording a solo album, George recorded demos of several of his rejected songs, including this one take of which would be released on Anthology 3 in the mid-90s. After producing a version of the song with Billy Preston, George recorded his solo version of the song shortly thereafter, with guest musicians Jim Price and Bobby Keys on horns, and Pete Drake on pedal steel guitar. In addition to its spot as the title track, I feel the song serves as an emotional anchoring point for Harrison's music at the time, with the realization that his relationship with the other Beatles had reached an unfortunate but inevitable turning point. It's a sad but beautiful reminder that all good things end eventually. Written in January of 1969 amidst the tense Get Back sessions, and during a brief time when George's then-wife, Pattie Boyd, had left him after discovering he'd had an affair with a house guest, Hear Me Lord carries a spiritual urgency that some, including George's biographer, Simon Lang, felt was unheard of coming from a music star of the era. The Beatles briefly rehearsed the song just prior to the on-camera row between George and bandmate Paul McCartney, which in turn eventually led to his temporary leaving the band. But after concessions were made to bring Harrison back, he chose not to rehearse the song again with the Beatles. While I don't consider myself particularly spiritual or religious, and I'm that way by choice, I have always loved George's music in that particular vein, and this slow, pleading closer to side 4 of the album is a fine example of his spiritual expression. As George Harrison's best-known foray into spiritual music, My Sweet Lord is equally lauded for its simple theme and infamous for its history. It was written in December of 1969 while touring with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, with the song intended as a simple call for a more direct relationship with God that followers of any religion could find accessible. George never approached the Beatles to record a version of this, and instead eventually gave it to Billy Preston to record and release. Preston's version was a minor hit in Europe, but like its parent album, it didn't make much more of an impression. While apprehensive of the idea of making a profound religious statement and having to live by it afterwards, George put the song to tape with Phil Spector producing the sessions. Among the known musicians on the song were Billy Preston, Eric Clapton, Ringo Starr, Jim Gordon, and Badfinger's classic lineup. Despite Harrison's wishes that no singles be released that could take attention away from the album, My Sweet Lord was issued as the lead single. By mid-1971, George was facing a copyright infringement lawsuit from Bright Records over allegedly ripping off the Chiffon song, He's So Fine. During the long drawn-out proceedings, George's manager Alan Klein tried to buy control of Bright Records' music catalog, which in turn extended the lawsuit. and later complicated it further after Harrison severed ties with Klein when he tried again to buy control of the catalog merely for himself. Despite clearly not intentional, the final ruling was that infringement had occurred. Eventually, however, Klein obtained the rights to He's So Fine and sold it off to Harrison, and Harrison got the last laugh against Klein by using the former manager's violation of his responsibilities to reduce the cost of buying the song's rights down to the same amount Klein had paid for it in the first place. While not one of my overall favorite tunes, My Sweet Lord did help generate my interest in George Harrison's solo output. With the title derived from the Northern English phrase of trouble at the mill, Run of the Mill is a head-on expression of the deteriorating relationship, personal and professional, of the Beatles as the 60s drew to a close. While the exact event that sparked the creation of this piece is unknown, some have speculated that it may have been the Beatles' experience at Twickenham Studios early on in the Get Back recording and filming sessions. The lyrics are more than likely equal indictments of Paul McCartney's bossy attitude towards the rest of the band at this time, which was further reflected in his decision to split with the others on their choice of a new manager, as well as John Lennon's increasing indifference towards the band's pressing affairs, which in turn was expressed towards Harrison's attempts to record new songs with the band. Run of the Mill was recorded a month and a half after the Beatles' breakup became official, with a minimalist arrangement in mind much like that of the music by the band. Despite the raw nerves exposed by this piece, it's one of my favorites off the album with its call to maturity attitude. Written in the wake of several tension-fueled moments during the early Get Back sessions that led to Harrison's temporary departure from the Beatles, Wah Wah was a directed verbal swipe that, by the accounts given by then associates of the band, and in my own personal opinion, was well-deserved. While Harrison himself has said that most of the song's frustration is aimed at Paul McCartney, the circumstances of Harrison's departure and the lead-up to his return clearly showed John Lennon and Yoko Ono also bore some of the responsibility. However, George remained reticent to point the finger at John over this. The song's lyrics point out that George felt that Paul and John may have treated him at times as merely an instrument of the band, rather than an equal partner, and that he had tasted freedom outside the band, no doubt a result of his recent time touring with other artists. Wah Wah has the distinction of being the first song recorded for the album. However, Harrison had gone on the record numerous times about disagreeing with producer Phil Spector's decision to add a lot of reverb to the sound mix, which unfortunately does hurt the listener's ability to hear George's vocals. Despite this, Wah Wah is one of my overall favorite songs off the album due to its catchy guitar lines and to-the-point lyrics. Likely to have been inspired by Timothy Leary's book The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, George began writing Art of Dying in 1966, amidst his growing fascination with Hinduism-based spirituality. The song's lyrics reflect the concept of continued death and reincarnation. The album cut, produced with Phil Spector's typical lavish sound textures, features the future Derek and the Dominoes lineup with Eric Clapton playing the lead guitar part. In addition, Phil Collins was among the percussion players during the song's recording sessions, although his parts may have not ended up in the final mix. As one of my overall favorites, I do like Art of Dying's guitar and horn parts, and its frantic pace. Offered for inclusion on several Beatles albums and rejected each time, Isn't It a Pity is considered the emotional centerpiece of the album by many music critics and historians. Lyrically, it's an examination of the effects of a long-term relationship having reached its lowest points. Its impartial tone suggests that when one person lets someone else down, both are responsible. Two different versions of the song are included on the album. The first one runs over 7 minutes and features Phil Spector's trademark wall of sound approach, while the shorter second version has a slower pace coupled with a less full arrangement. Both recordings employed a large number of musicians, the most in fact of all the songs on the album. George had intended to release Isn't It a Pity as the lead-off single for the album, but was talked out of it in favor of releasing My Sweet Lord instead. I'd have to agree that this is a wise decision, although Isn't It a Pity is clearly one of George's best songs overall, even if it isn't one of my favorites. Named partly in honor of the original owner of Harrison's then recently bought home, Friar Park, Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, aka Let It Roll, was his first tribute to both Crisp and Friar Park, the latter of which became a symbol of an unrestricted private retreat, one that Harrison revitalized after years of disrepair. Some of the song's structure came from a demoed song called Everybody Nobody, originally featured among the demos Harrison played for Phil Spector. After rewrites, the song became, in the words of author Ian Inglis, a guided tour of the house and grounds. The lyrics also reflect Harrison's developing interest in film, which would eventually culminate in the creation of the company Handmade Films. The meandering yet contemplative feel of this song has always appealed to me, and it's another one of my favorites. Written in late 1968, Let It Down was one of the most overtly sensual songs that Harrison ever wrote. It was written at a point in his life when the temptations of being a rock star were clearly overtaking him, despite his wish to maintain close ties to the Hare Krishna faith, a faith that advocated for celibacy. Despite several rehearsal runs of the song, it was not recorded by the Beatles, largely due to a lack of interest on Lennon and McCartney's part in the majority of the songs that Harrison had offered. During recording sessions for this song, producer Phil Spector's behavior became more erratic, with a marked increase in drinking. Eventually, he was sidelined by breaking his arm during a session, leaving George to handle producer responsibilities mostly by himself through mid-August. Due to its calm in the verses, then loud and demanding in the chorus nature, Let It Down is one of my favorite songs off this album. What Is Life was originally written with the idea of giving it to Billy Preston for release as a single, while George was helping produce Preston's solo album That's the Way God Planned It in late 1968. Whether or not the song's lyrics are meant to be seen as a straightforward love song or a devotional song like many of his others is debatable. Those in favor of the latter interpretation see What Is Life as a moment of spiritual uncertainty, as opposed to the more self-assuredness of a song like Awaiting on You All. What Is Life would go on to be released as a hit single and endures today as one of George's more well-known solo songs. It was also among the first songs to pique my interest in his solo material. A joyous leap into gospel music, Awaiting on You All invites listeners to embrace God through chanting, and largely validates beliefs of all walks of life. In contrast, however, it does take jabs at the Catholic Church's tendency to involve itself in business a little too much. The song's lyrics in general also flew in the face of evangelical movements due to its vagueness regarding the nature of God outside the idea that you could embrace the concept without the need for a place of worship or the need to visit holy sites. While Phil Spector's wall of sound approach to producing the bulk of the album might have seemed out of place on some other songs, it fits Awaiting on You All perfectly. On a final note, while I myself am not religious nor generally spiritual, I'll admit that I do enjoy a good religious song every now and then when they're well written, and Awaiting on You All is definitely one of those. Rooted in the Radha Krishna Temple's view that spirituality should always take precedence over materialism, Beware of Darkness serves as a cautionary piece against con men, politicians, pop idols, and negative thoughts. Despite having never been released as a single, it has become one of the most beloved songs from this album among music critic circles. It took a few listens to grow on me, but now I'd have to say it's my overall favorite song off the album. And on a more personal note, the final verse has almost become a mantra for me over the past few years. Of the tracks that make up the final third of the album, only It's Johnny's Birthday has vocals. Patterned off the Cliff Richard song Congratulations, it was included to honor John Lennon's 30th birthday. As for the remaining pieces that make up the Apple Jam disc, George decided to tack them onto the end of the album as a bonus because he felt they were too good to not release. Thanks for the Pepperoni and Plug Me In date from June, and feature extended guitar solos from Harrison, Eric Clapton, and Dave Mason. Out of the Blue features Bobby Keys and Jim Price on sax and horn parts, respectively. I Remember Jeep, named in honor of a dog Clapton owned, features audio samples of Moog synthesizer noises originally featured on the Electronic Sound album. The jam material is a fun listen, although trying to plow through it all in one sitting can be a bit much, in my opinion. Naturally, among the songs considered and recorded for the album, there were a few that didn't make the cut. Some of these songs were revisited later and released over the course of George's solo career, while others still haven't surfaced yet. If another reissue comes, preferably on CD format since that's what I buy, and it features some of these unreleased tunes, I would definitely buy it. I'd especially like to have a copy of Dara Dune in my collection. In conclusion, All Things Must Pass definitely deserves its spot as the best Beatles solo record in terms of critical acclaim. While it wasn't the first solo album of George's I bought, that honor goes to Living in the Material World, I would highly recommend it as a gateway to his solo material for anyone interested in listening to his work on an album-by-album basis, which I highly recommend as far as listening experiences go. So, to the All Things Must Pass album, happy 50th.